everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we're going to dye some alpaca yarn in two forms. One that is going to be non-superwash and one that is a superwash blend. And I want to dye both of these with the cold process shoebox technique to see what kind of differences we get when we're dealing with alpaca fibers. Because I've done a lot of superwash and non-superwash comparisons with wool, but not so much alpaca. But before I talk a little bit more about our yarn, I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Corinne. Corinne, thank you so much for being my lab partner today, and I really hope you're gonna love your alpaca yarn. For our yarn bases, I have a DK weight Bear Baby Alpaca yarn that was a limited edition yarn from Knit Picks. This yarn is 100% baby alpaca. It's non-superwash and is so unbelievably soft. Eco Superwash, on the other hand, is slightly different because it has a different construction overall, and the yarn is 70% superwash fine Highland alpaca, 30% nylon. Now, these may all have alpaca fiber, but there's differences in the alpaca fibers themselves. So it's not the most equal superwash versus non-superwash comparison. The yarn base I use most frequently for that is Knit Picks Wool of the Andes, which is a Peruvian Highland wool base. And the reason why the superwash versus non-superwash works so well in that situation is that it's the same breed of wool, the same spin construction, the same yardage, but the one difference is that one of them would be superwash and one of them is non. However, there aren't that many superwash alpaca options, so I thought it would just be fun to compare these two bases together in this video. And I'll talk more about the cold process in a moment. Right now I am preparing the yarn for dyeing. I'm going to set up all of the dye pots tomorrow, but I'm starting with adding removable nylon zip ties onto the yarn. It just makes it easier to handle. And now we're going to go pre-soak the yarn. Pre-soaking is a feature I vary a lot throughout my videos. I usually start with cool water as I go and try to submerge the yarn. But my pre-soaks can vary from, goodness, anywhere between no time, I might dunk the yarn and then go dye it right away, to overnight. Well, I suppose it can sometimes be even longer, but ideally I wouldn't go too much longer than overnight. Now, one thing I don't do is scour the yarn. I think the only times I've done that in recent memory is when it comes to natural dyeing, because it was suggested as part of the mordanting process. But I honestly don't know if those videos have even come out yet here. So far, things seem to be soaking up water pretty well. I have a feeling that the baby alpaca base is no longer available on Knit Picks, which is a shame because it is so soft. But you should still be able to find the Eco Superwash. And so if you're interested in that sock yarn, I should have links and affiliate links down in the video description. All right, but now my plan is to let this sit aside overnight. Now, I did start to mention scouring, which is adding soap to help remove oils and things from the yarn. If you wanted to get really even color coverage, then scouring the yarn, washing it before you dye it, is a helpful step. At least in my brain, that's when it would be helpful. But another time it could be helpful is if you're having trouble wetting the yarn, if the yarn really isn't soaking in, a little bit of soap can maybe help that situation. But most of the time, I love there to be variation on the yarn. And so I don't mind if there's dirt or oils in there. I'll be washing it out throughout my dyeing process. But now let's go to tomorrow morning and set up our shoebox. Right here, I have 1% stock solutions of 5 different colors. I've got Jacquard turquoise, a little bit of Jacquard brilliant blue, a little bit of some Caribbean blue from Dharma, Jacquard hot fuchsia, and then we have Jacquard's jet black. And one thing I want to point out right now, see all those reds on the bottom? We're going to need to shake this up super well, and it's leaking everywhere. Of course it is. This is why you wear gloves. And this is also why I store my dyes in a secondary container. but we're gonna wanna shake it up really, really well to try to distribute that as best as possible, or else just acknowledge that this color is not a perfect stock solution. Now, some of these colors are known bleeders, so I'm a little concerned about dyeing my non-superwash alpaca with it, but we're gonna try it out, and I think we're gonna try to have less than 100 milliliters of dye total. I think that's gonna be my goal. You can't even really see the little cups I've set out here. All right, what I'm gonna do is we're gonna start by measuring out some of these dyes before we even set up our shoe boxes. So I'm gonna take about 10 milliliters of the hot fuchsia. Okay. And as for the tiny bit of little dye that's left in the graduated cylinder, that's gonna get rinsed out. Sometimes I like to hold on to extra little bits of dye, but today we're not going to. I was debating using the Caribbean blue, but I think I'm gonna go with the turquoise. I like Caribbean blue a little bit better, but I figure we may as well keep this all within one dye brand. They're all acid dyes, and so you absolutely can mix and match them. There's no problem with using things from Jacquard and Dharma in one project, but people are more likely to have all from one brand or all from the other. In general, I like Caribbean blue a little bit better, but that's just me. Okay, now for the brilliant blue, I actually don't know how much I have. All right, this is how we're gonna do it. I'm gonna measure out 15 milliliters of the brilliant blue. Okay, we did that twice. And now we probably have very little left. Maybe 7.5 milliliters left. So what I wanna do is I'm gonna fill this graduated cylinder up to 25 milliliters, maybe a little over. Add that back to the container. This is no longer 1%. Get another 25 milliliters of water in here. Shake it up. And now I can measure out 25 milliliters of this mixture, which is a way for me to divide up the rest of this dye really fairly. And we used up that stock solution, so that also feels great. Okay, and finally we have the jet black. Oh dear. This bottle is a little bit leaky. Shaking it up as well as I can. Hopefully, oh, that wasn't so bad that time. Well then, all right, let's get 25 milliliters of the black. And I suppose we could always get more of any of the other three colors. I'm just a little bit nervous about overdoing it on our non-superwash yarn. So I figure we'll start here. We can always add more dye, but you can't take it away. And I want to end up with yarn that is usable. So, yeah. All right, let me go set everything to the side and let's bring over the shoe boxes. I did change my mind. I'm back. I'm gonna add half a cup, and this is cold tap water. This kettle is not hot. I'm just using it as a pitcher. I'm adding half of a cup of water to each of these. This will allow me to spread the color out onto our yarn a little bit. And I apologize for the timer. Ooh. Aha, there we go. All right, let's bring over our pre-soaking yarn. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that I have the right yarn together. Although it could be interesting to mix up one on one in one, but I imagine that our superwash yarn is going to absorb dye faster than the non-superwash. Okay, so we are going to take our two skeins side by side and scrunch them on down. So that way, with some exception, but we mostly have one end of the yarn here, the other end up here, and I've done it in such a way so that way they're not twisted around each other. You could twist them as well, that would be fine. But this is our superwash yarn, and then here is our non-superwash. Now, I have not added any acid. I'm gonna make sure that we're not twisted. Not added any acid to the yarn or to the water yet. We likely will be adding our dyes first, but I found that 8 cups of water is enough that the yarn can float a little bit, but we still have some physical resist from the yarn itself that will help, I don't know, keep the dyes when I add from spreading all the way through, at least at first. But of course, we'll see how it goes. Okay, and now I want to start adding our colors. I'm going to start with the pinks, and I'm going to pour up by the zip ties. And the colors, you can already see, are spreading out a fair amount. A lot of times I add our dye stalks on straight, which I'm not doing today. Okay, here is that turquoise, sort of to the side of the middle. Trying to go back and forth to be a little bit even over both of the containers. But you can see the patterning of the way the colors will move through is going to be different. Okay, now here is this blue, which we have a lot more of this color. And if it blends with the turquoise, I think it could be hard to see some differences because some of the turquoise and pink blend will be that color blue. It's possible we have a touch too much water in here. Here is the black. Because you can see now that we've got a lot more water volume. But I'll show you the side in a moment. Because there is definitely some resist I can see. There's definitely some yarn that doesn't have dye on it yet. But now I need to let things sit for a little bit. I'm gonna let it sit, and it's a little bit arbitrary how long I decide to let things sit at this stage. But I'm gonna set a timer for 15 minutes. And this is gonna give a little bit of time for some of the dye to spread. Some of it won't spread, but some of it will. And some of it may start sort of soaking into the yarn, but also some of it won't. And so we see some little patches of pink here on the surface. Those will probably go away, but we will be blending everything in the end anyway. I suppose I didn't talk much yet in this video about my shoebox technique. It's a technique where I like to pour dye on yarn at room temperature, usually without acid being in there first, and then right before we move the yarn, I'll add some acid, then move the yarn to sort of blend things out. And on superwash yarn, what I've seen so far is it gives a lovely, subtle, variegated colorway because some amount of the dyes may start striking where they've been originally placed, and then others may not. And so my hypothesis is that on our superwash alpaca blend, we're gonna see a lot more variation of color in the end than we will on our non-superwash yarn. But we never know. This isn't quite T0, but here is the side of one of the pans, and you can see that the pink hasn't gone all the way through to the bottom. But here on the superwash, there's a lot more white, not necessarily because of the way that it was poured, but it felt to me like we had more yarn volume in the superwash yarn than we did on the non-superwash. Look at those little tendrils of dye just sort of mixing and diffusing. Woohoo! things honestly look about the same. I wonder what would happen if I was then to just leave it here overnight without touching. But I want to add some acid now. I'm going to add, let's see, a tablespoon over the pink, 1 over the turquoise, and then a third in between the blue and the black. Now, in other cases, I would lift things up and move it right away. I'm gonna give this 5 minutes, I think, today. I don't know if it'll make any difference, but it may cause us to get at least some variation. Now with the superwash one, I would be inclined to just move everything right now because, well, I'm not expecting everything to clear right away without like movement and stuff, but I know having acid early on will remove some of the effect I like, but I want to maintain some of the color difference here, and so I'm trying to optimize for both. So I'll see you in a couple minutes. All right. Now I'm going to do these one at a time, and I'm carefully going to lift the yarn. Ooh, that is pretty. And then lower it again, making space. Ooh, this is very, very pretty. And see, now I'm moving things through, but I'm also trying to leave it a little bit now. So we've got this gorgeous black through bluish purple gradient over there. But this gradient happens because when I started putting the yarn back in, things aren't still perfectly mixed. So there's still like some asymmetry of the color left in the pan, even though there was some movement. But some color was sort of stuck on the yarn where we first placed it. And so with this one, honestly, things are looking a little bit similar, which is good. Now, maybe there's a little bit more blending, but if we can maintain some of that pinkish purple down there, then I think we're gonna have a winner. And I'm just excited. So we have, what, 3 tablespoons of vinegar in about 10 cups of water if you include the amount of liquid that I added with the dyes. So that's wonderful. But at this stage, I'm gonna let the yarn sit here for an hour before I pick it up and move it outside. And the main reason for that is to avoid mixing it too much right now. We are now in contact with acid. Some of the color may start sticking to the yarn, and if I move it too soon, then I could really just stir everything up, and I'm hoping to maintain some of the color differences we have in here. And so it's possible this step wouldn't make a difference. This isn't something I'm likely to try as a side-by-side to see if it would make a difference. But I'll see you in an hour, and then we'll take it outside where it's very, very hot. It's been an hour. Right now things look very, very similar, which is promising. I see little hints of pink in both areas that are more blue, areas that are more gray. But now I'm going to put lids on and carefully take these outside where I think it's like 95 degrees outside in Massachusetts on this July day. I'm not going to bring the camera out there because I'm sure that the humidity will condense on it, and no point putting the camera through that. But I'll leave the yarn outside for a minimum of overnight, potentially 2 nights. We'll check in the morning when hopefully it's less hot. It's the next morning, and please excuse all the construction sounds. It has cooled off a lot around here, and yeah, that's good. Okay, the first thing I see immediately is with our non-superwash yarn, the water looks pink. There's like a pink haze over it, which I think we've got some glare. I don't know if that's going to show up on camera. I can't tell. It'll show up when I pick up the yarn though. So this is our superwash, I think. There is a hint of pink left in the water. What? Oh, we've got some browns down here. You know why? Because jet black is not a primary. That's what it was. Is this? No, that's something on the bottom. I wasn't sure if that was residue in the container. We've got a hint of some pink in here, but we've got a lot of blending. Ooh, there's some pinks in the middle. All right, let's just check on our non-superwash. You know, if all that's left are some pinks, then that is pretty darn good. But looking over here, I see very little pink in the top of the yarn. Probably because that fluorescent fuchsia isn't striking. But we also have a little bit of brown down here from the black, but we have multiple different blue hues in here. So this is really good. But I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go bring a kettle out here. Okay, I've got my big 12-quart Dyepot and the lid. So I am going to remove this yarn. Corinne, I think this is your yarn here. Okay. Swap things around. Come over. Yeah, the yarn is looking very blue in here, but I'm going to take this pink color and pour it on, because we'll heat set this in the kettle so we can absorb, hopefully, some of those pink tones. If we don't, we don't. But this has shown us one massive difference already between our superwash and non-superwash. There's a hint of pink left in here. Should we? I'm not going to put it on. I considered, we're going to add a little bit. This isn't going to change much. There's almost no color in here, but I don't mind increasing the water level a little bit. But now I'm going to have this just on top. And so there's distance between the bottom of this and the top of, I think, how many? It's like a hand width. Yes, there's plenty of distance there. So we can steam set this while we heat set the other. We're slowly heating up, although we are getting a little bit of steam in here already. I'm going to go ahead and set a timer for 45 minutes. I only plan to really steam set for 30, but I want to give some time for the pot to heat up. So that's why we have the additional time. It's been 45 minutes. Whew, it's a little warm. All right, here is our superwash alpaca nylon. The water that's dripping from this is clear, but we expected that. I know superwash wool can absorb that fluorescent, that hot fuchsia color. It just takes time. However, in my experience, alpaca needs a little bit more heat and time than wool. But it could vary on the type of alpaca. Okay, now that the zip ties were submerged, what I'm going to do is lift them up with the tongs and let it sit for a moment. Just to let them cool off. And I'm trying to tell if I see pink in there or not. I'm thinking not. I mean, maybe not is not entirely accurate. Oh my gosh, there's a hint of some pink in there. And I think the amount of pink I'm seeing left in the pan is not, do you see this pink? Very, very subtle. I think the amount of pink that remains is less than the total amount that I used. We do have a little bit of some variation in here. It's just extremely, extremely subtle. Oh, I have to decide. And part of my decision-making process was that I was like, oh, I really want to use this pot for another project. Which is not a reason to give up. Now, I'm going to keep the heat off. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a bit more tablespoons of vinegar. I'm gonna leave this, I'm gonna move it to a different burner. I'm gonna leave it to cool off, probably around an hour or so. And then we'll come back to remove it, because maybe we'll absorb a little bit more pink. We'll see. It's been over an hour of cooling. And I would say that we have very little pink left here. Maybe there's a hint more in the yarn. The colors are super subtle. Something about it, not that it feels metallic, but the shifts are gonna give a project some stunning dimension. I'm just pleased that we have some variation in here. But anyway, I'm gonna set this aside to cool completely so we can go wash it. I'm about to wash the 4 skeins of yarn together. Here is our superwash yarn that has some more pink in it. And here is our non-superwash yarn, which hopefully, yeah, it doesn't seem to have felting. There's definitely less tonal variation in here. And it feels a little bit less saturated overall, even though we know that there was the exact same amount of dye on both, save for a tiny bit of pink. Okay, I've added it to just some cool water. I'm adding a little bit of some dish soap so we can start washing this. Now, it would not surprise me to see some pink bleed, but I think we might be okay. Ooh, we might be okay. Now, oh man, there's still a little bit of soap on my hand. I'm excited to see what the yarn looks like dry, because we might feel even more dimension in the non-superwash alpaca then. Because I will say that the non-superwash yarn is a, quote, nicer yarn. It is, I mean, it's baby alpaca, right? You only get the baby alpaca the one time. I believe, I think that's how it works. But both are very pretty. I just, personally, I'm drawn to the variation in the superwash one, which isn't to say we couldn't get more variation in the non-superwash yarn. I just think that we might need to add acid a little sooner. And there's definitely variation, it's just way more subtle. We don't have like pastel blues, everything blended a little bit more because it hadn't struck as fast. And so, yeah, I think that if I were to have a little bit of acid in there to begin with on the non-superwash alpaca yarn, that may aid in getting some more variation in there, but we wouldn't know until we try. But anyway, I'm now gonna go put this through my spin dryer, and now I'll go hang it up so it can finish drying. Everything is a balancing act, and unfortunately I don't have more of the baby alpaca yarn. I think that was limited edition, but I can play around with this more on other non-superwash alpaca and wool in the future to see if I can shift positions to get more coloration, because what we need is a balance between some of the colors striking right away, but then still being able to spread it all out versus all the dye striking really, really slow and spreading it too much. So there's a balancing act there. And I think if you play with this over and over with the same type of yarn, the same yarn base, then you can start to figure things out a little better. Here's all the finished yarn. We have our non-superwash baby alpaca. She's so soft. And then we have the superwash alpaca nylon blend, which is also really soft. Now, both of them, I would say, have a similar almost dimension with the grays and blues. There's a lot of that feels similar. The big difference is the pink. The pink is a lot more obvious on the superwash yarn, and it's present. It's a little bit present, but it's way more subtle on our non-superwash alpaca. And I think that's because the pinks didn't start striking right away. They didn't strike as quickly. And so even when we added acid, we just ended up with a little bit less of it, and all the colors blended a little bit more over here. I mean, there's still a little bit of pink in here in the non-superwash yarn. It's just we have more, I'd say more variation overall in the sock yarn, the superwash nylon blend, which doesn't make one better than the other. You can still do the shoebox technique on a non-superwash yarn, it's just the results might be even more subtle. But when I go and I twist this up, I think that that helps make some of the variation in here a little bit more obvious because you see things in closer proximity. Of course, you could see that variation without it being twisted. It's amazing that the black gives us so much grain. I had forgotten that about Jacquard's Jet Black, but it's still very lovely, very subtle, but very, very lovely. Twisting it also really highlights some of that variation we have in our superwash yarn as well. And maybe this also helps highlight the difference that we see between the two. Corinne, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I really hope that you've enjoyed both the dyeing project and that you're gonna love your baby alpaca yarn. Oh, the technique is so gentle on the yarn. In some cases, I suppose you might worry about leaving your yarn in acidic conditions for a long period of time, but acid doesn't really hurt wool, so I don't think it's a problem. I think the lack of agitation does help, but everything is incredibly soft here, and I love it. So Corinne, thank you again for being my lab partner today. And if you at home want to learn more about how you can become a lab partner of an episode of Dyepot Weekly, go and check out the listing in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I'll have that linked down below. The way things are twisted right here makes these two skeins look quite different. And that's just based on how the colors were twisted up. And I think it's important to remember that sometimes things can look a lot more different when twisted, but then be more similar when laid flat. Even though there are going to be differences skein to skein with this technique just because of that random variation that you get. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post videos at least twice a week and you don't want to miss any of the fun. And subscribing is the biggest thing you can do to help support the content here. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and thank you so much for watching.